Sarah Todd joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Covers the Sixers for Philly.com, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Philadelphia Daily News. Sarah, how you doing on this Tuesday?
I'm just got my voice back after losing it for a few days, so I'm feeling a lot better today.
Well, that's always a positive.
Did you lose it from the Eagles game?
No, I didn't. I watched that on a delay, but I heard a few of my neighbors losing their voice. So
yeah, as we all did.
So, Sarah, one of the things we want to talk to you about is this whole Jimmy Butler thing. I've been saying this feels like almost like contrived drama. I feel like that we overlook the fact that, look, people can have disagreements. People can agree and disagree and have debate and have discussion, and things that happen in a private setting, really shouldn't be put out there in the public. And I really feel like that, no offense to, Woj and Ramona, they're great reporters, but to me, I feel like that whoever their source is, that person did nobody any favors by putting that information out there.
yeah, I think it's clear that, whoever leaked the story was not doing anybody any favors. There's very few people in the world that could benefit. I think that when we're looking at the story, there's a few things that we need to look at. One, if you think that people don't fight in the NBA behind closed doors on a regular basis, you're absolutely wrong. That happens all the time. These are athletes. They're going to be lively debates every single day. But this is also Jimmy Butler. We know his past, too. So everything that we learn about maybe a fight with him has to be taken a little bit differently because we know his attitude, his demeanor, how things have been with other teams, and how they've ended very sourly. And then on the other side of that, too, is when we've asked these players, multiple players have been asked about this. Brett Brown, Jimmy Butler, as you know, were asked about it. And it's not like anybody said, what film session? What are you talking about? What fight? Everybody knew exactly what we were talking about. So I think that we need to remember that even though they're saying there's no story, they do know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Josh, Sarah, that this story is a little bit overhyped. When it first came out, that's the frustrating part. When it first came out, you see Woj, you see Ramona Shelburne attached to it, so you say, man, there's something here. So once you dig deep and you kind of let it settle after a day or two and you realize that this isn't the full story, A, it's frustrating, B, it's disappointing. But at the same time, I want to ask you, you're around this team all the time. Is there any truth to what is going on with Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons? Like, is there any potential legit tension or frustration, whether it's with Jimmy Butler, whether it's with Joel Embiid, Brett Brown, etc.? Is there anything there that maybe wasn't in this story?
I mean, I think that there's been tension going on in all of those areas for a little while. How large that tension is or how impactful it's going to be, none of us really know right now. But this is how it always starts when teams start to kind of fall apart or blow up. I'm not saying that that's happening, but that's why everyone's making a big deal out of these things, because when there is a fight and when everyone starts to deny it, that's the first thing you hear. And then down the line, you're talking about a coach getting fired or players being traded, etc. So that's when everyone's like, oh, God, what's happening right now? But, when Joel Embiid gripes after games, he's basically subtweeting Ben Simmons, and when we hear about Jimmy Butler challenging Brett Brown, he's, subtweeting Brett, basically. And it's, I think that there is tension. I mean, when Joel complains about how he's being used, it's easy to think that he's talking about Brett Brown's system, but that's almost a direct shot at Ben Simmons because he's the one that doesn't space the floor, that clogs the lane for him, that forces him out to the, outside arc. So there is some tension, I think, within this team. Also, they've been going through a lot of stuff this year, especially the last actual calendar year. I think only time is going to tell.
Yeah, I agree. I said that right before you came on. I said it's been a tension-filled year, a crazy year for this whole team with Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, everyone screaming he needs a jump shot, the Joel Embiid drama, which never goes away, good, bad, or ugly, and then the Jimmy Butler stuff, the Brett Brown stuff. It just goes on and on. But I want to shift to Brett Brown for a second with you, and I want your opinion and insight on how you believe he's managed this team and led this team since the arrival of Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, I think Brett is definitely known as a culture guy, as a relationships guy. And so, moving forward and this past 6-7 weeks, I think there's not really a better guy that you would want as far as managing young guys, managing relationships on a team. But the question is going to come later on when they do make another playoff run is the relationships are fine, but is he going to get out coached again? So I think that's where we're really going to be eyeing him in the season.
Sarah, I wanted to ask you, because you used to cover the Warriors, and I think that people, because in our area, most fans don't see the West Coast as much what goes on out there. And I want you to just kind of give the audience an idea of the fact that you mentioned earlier, all NBA teams have some arguments and disagreements. And the Warriors, that's a team of strong personalities at this point. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson only speaks every once in a while. Draymond Green is like a modern-day version of Bill Laimbeer. Kevin Durant is in his own dimension, it seems like, half the time. And then you got Steve Kerr, who's having to herald that whole thing. So, do you see any similarities or differences or aspects of what you saw with the Warriors compared to what you're seeing here in Philadelphia?
Well, first, I don't exactly think I would agree that Draymond Green is like Bill Laimbeer, because I would not think for a second that Bill Laimbeer would ever stop himself from hitting someone for real. And I think Draymond would actually hold back from that. But to your point, I guess there are some similarities. Draymond has always been. That's not just a national story that he's a loudmouth. From the day I was there when he was a rookie, from the day he came into the league, he was yapping and creating that small drama that is never reported, that is never talked about. So, yeah, there are similarities in that sense. There's a player like that on every team, that there's always that kind of stuff. But at the same time, none of them really came to the Warriors with the reputation that Jimmy Butler has. That's why I say, we have to take everything a little bit differently when we hear it about Jimmy, because we know his past. It might be a little bit unfair to him, yeah, but there's no denying kind of the situations that he's been through. And that kind of stuff that you're talking about, the day-to-day infighting or arguing or challenging or small confrontations, those don't go reported for a reason. And then when you do hear about one of the fights, there is a reason that it's reported, because it's so different.
How do you think the relationship is with Butler and Embiid right now? Because it seems like Butler and Simmons are just going out and getting snow cones together, every weekend, whereas Embiid's kind of sitting on the outside looking in. And, he voices his frustration after the Toronto loss. That's what stands out to me. And just more and more frustrations and rumors seem to grow. But it seems like with me, Butler and Embiid is the key to everything. And right now it's a lot of Butler and Simmons, and then that's why some of the Simmons stuff has been magnified.
Yeah, let's say that potentially that the Sixers re-sign Butler, and then things still aren't working out. The odd man out is going to be Simmons. Nobody's going to even think about getting rid of Embiid or Butler if he resigns here. But if Simmons is still on the outside and if things still aren't working, he would be the first one to go out of those three. And so I think that the relationship between Embiid and Butler could be better, not necessarily outside of the game, but they need to be working a little bit more synergistically between them. And you're right, Embiid does not have the same relationship that Butler has with Simmons, seemingly. And Brett Brown has kind of perpetuated that a little bit. Right when Butler got here, he said, I want him to take Ben under his wing. I want him to, encourage him to be more aggressive defensively. And, we saw the headband thing that they're doing. They are, joking around a lot more than we see with some of the other guys. But that also might be a little bit of what we think we're seeing, because when you put it in your mind, then you're going to see it all the time. It's like when you buy a new car, then you see everybody else that has that car. So I think that there's a little bit to that. I'm not exactly sure how far it goes. And again, time is only going to tell, because if things continue to be, if there continues to be strife, and if it continues to be between an Embiid and Butler, then we'll know that it's gone a little bit too far.
Sixers beat writer Sarah Todd joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Sarah, speaking of Embiid, this guy's having an incredible season. And, underneath all of the, the melodrama that's out there with the different reports, and then of course we've had to hear about Foles this year and everything that's going on, Embiid is having an incredible year, and it almost seems like the drama, both real and contrived, is kind of overshadowing that. I mean, this guy is having an incredible season, a practically an MVP caliber type season, and I don't know if that gets talked about enough.
Yeah, and the Sixers are actually doing really well too. That's one of the things that Brett was kind of trying to steer the conversation away from when we're all asking him these questions about this confrontation in Portland. The Sixers are actually doing pretty well. It's hard to complain about a 26-14 team in January, but we're finding ways to do it. And like you said, Embiid is having a great year. He's averaging 26, 27 points, 13 rebounds a game. And he's legitimately in MVP conversations. Across the league, many people are talking about him. And he's also going to be again in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. There are definite positives to look at with this team.
One of those positives is they have this incredible record at home, 17-3 at home as they go into the game tonight versus the Wizards. Of course, folks can hear all the Sixers action tonight on 97.3 ESPN as the Sixers have back-to-back games with the Wizards home and home series. But 17-3 at home, I think that is something that gets overlooked because of the fact that, look, this is still a young team, but the way they're handling their business at home, it really feels like if this team keeps playing well, Sarah, and they get a home series or two in the playoffs, that home court advantage is going to be a massive opportunity for them when they go to the postseason.
Yeah, that's something that we saw with them last season. They had a really good home court advantage. I think we knew that they weren't exactly ready to go deep last season, and it's, I think, really dependent on what happens between now and the playoffs, what they're going to look out on the buyout market, if they're going to go for any more trades before the deadline, what they're going to do with that available roster spot, which I think they definitely need to fill. I don't think there's any reason not to have somebody in that slot right now. But like you said, 17-3 at home, the 9-11 on the road is not as good, but there are worse road records in the NBA. So I think there's no question that when we're approaching the playoffs, that they're to want that home court advantage, especially for that first round, so that they can kind of make their way through that and not have any bumps to get into the second.
Another thing that's been frustrating, Josh seems to point out the positive, and I'm really good at pointing out the negative, so I'm just going to keep that trend going. But to recap the
what
last...
are you trying to say, man?
Nah, I'm making fun of myself. But the Sixers over the past week or so, and really just over the past year and a half, they like to make games interesting, whether it's turning the ball over too much or getting out to a lead and then blowing it. Against the Clippers, they had a 24-point deficit cut to 4. Against the Suns, they had a 30-point lead cut down to a 3-point game. The Mavs came back from a 19-point deficit over the weekend, cutting it to 4. All right, while it's a lot of turnovers are unforced, they can be avoidable. So my question to you is, when is this going to turn around for this team? I'm sick of the answer being they're just young and they're having growing pains. Like, at some point, they're not disciplined, and it falls back on the coach.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, at some point, that is going to be the thing that we're talking about. And when you see a lot of those turnovers, I think it ties back into, who wants the ball, who feels like they're the guy. We see it happen a lot with Joel at the end of games, where he wants the ball, he gets it in the post, he gets doubled, and he takes one too many dribbles when there's one too many guys around him, and that's when he loses the ball. And so there's got to be, at some point, like you said, some discipline to know the moment, to understand it's late in the game, you can't give this up, pass it out to the open guy. I think that's the biggest reason that they turn the ball over late, is they've got multiple guys that kind of feel that way, that they want to be the one. But, I mean, I hate to ruin your bad cop moment, but a lot of it also is youth. That's going to happen. With young guys, they're not only going to want to be the guy, but they're also not going to be experienced in those situations. And so when we see a team that has, Ben Simmons, Landry Shamet, sometimes we've got other young guys out there that don't really know what they're doing. And you can't really count on someone like Ben Simmons or TJ McConnell to have all the answers. No matter how good TJ is or how long he's been here, he's not going to have all the answers. And then no matter how controlled he looks in certain situations, we do see him get overwhelmed. So that is just going to take some time being in the league.
Not to break my role here, but it's interesting that Ryan brought up Brett Brown to you, because one of the things that I get mentioned to a lot, whether it's when I'm hosting the show or when I'm meeting people out in public, Sarah, is a lot of people think that Brett Brown is going to be the Sixers what Mark Jackson was to the Warriors. Well, you've seen the Warriors. Do you think that's a fair analogy, or do you think Brett Brown, the Sixers situation, is very much different than the Mark Jackson Warriors dynamic?
I can see the similarities in that they were the coach that was there that kind of brought them back to a winning record. I think that's kind of where the similarities end, though, because I was around Mark Jackson. I was there when he was fired, and he was not willing to bring in other input, and he wasn't willing to have suggestions made. I think that Brett is way more open to making changes and bringing in other ideas and schemes. He is open to that. I think that it definitely is no secret that he was outcoached by Brad Stevens. He doesn't have exactly the X and O mentality that some of the other more strategy-based coaches in the league have. But I think that the similarities are a little bit weak between those two.
All right, Sarah, before we let you go, Markelle Fultz, any updates? What do you got? Any news with him?
If you have news, let me know, because your guess is as good as mine.
Any type of idea on a timetable or any opinion on what the Sixers may be doing with him this season, or no clue?
It's really it's really a mystery. I think that the best thing for us to hope for at this point is two things. One, let's hope that he gets back on the court, obviously. And if it's not as good as we thought it was going to be, or if he's not going to make an impact to where it's going to push this team forward, then I hope that he at least plays enough to where he can get a little bit of trade value, because right now there's really nothing there.
All right, good stuff. We're all waiting and seeing for Markelle Fultz and what the story is with him. Sarah Todd, 76ers beat writer, Philly Inquirer, Philly Daily News, Philly.com, former Warriors reporter. Thank you so much for spending some time with the good cop and bad cop, Josh and I, today.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
Sarah Todd, join us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN.